rakit mimpimu.
Hi everyone! Woo! We're soon gonna start the Novice Nudc 2025. Let's give everybody a round of applause first. Woo! So, before we introduce the wonderful teams that are the top 4 this year, let's call upon the judges first. And I'm going to give a brief introduction and let's give everyone a welcome applause, okay? So first of all, let's introduce Aulia Syafa Kamila from Universitas Pajajaran. Woo! The second judge would be Axel Oktarino Chandra from Universitas Parahyangan. Woo! The next would be myself from Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Next, we have Kevin Rendra Pratama from Universitas Diponegoro. We have Lindsay Renee Rumui from Universitas Katolik Atmajaya Jakarta, one of our best and one. Woo! We have Rachel Chen from Universitas Bina Nusantara. We have Stanley Marco Effendi from Universitas Telkom. Woo! We have Syagung Gunawan Mei from Universitas Gadjah Mada. And last but certainly not least, we have our wonderful chair, Elgard Mario Wiandika from Universitas Indonesia. Next, I'm gonna call upon the teams. First, from Banten, we have Universitas Pelita Harapan as OG. Let's give them a round of applause. Then we have from Surabaya, we have Universitas Katolik Widya Mandala as OO. Woo. From Aceh, we have Universitas Syiah Kuala as CG. And last but not least, from Banten as well, we have Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa as CO. Woo! So with that, let's pass it immediately to the chair, Kak Elgard. Let's give a round of applause so we can start Novice and UDC 2025. Woo!
Test. All right. Okay, thank you so much everyone for coming to watch the finals for Novice. Before we proceed, let's call first the 4 teams into the stage. All right, in OG from Banten, please welcome to the stage Universitas Pelita Harapan. Opening opposition. From Surabaya, we welcome Universitas Katolik Widya Mandala. And from Aceh, we welcome Universitas Syiah Kuala as closing government. And as CO from Banten, Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa. All right, everyone please get yourself comfortable. Please hurry to the stage and get seated. Before we proceed, several ground rules to everyone. This is an open final, so there must be exciting arguments being made that would make you want to clap and be excited. We're not gonna police you on that. You can make some noises if you feel like it's a good argument or and so on and so forth. But please ensure that your noises that you create does not hamper the audibility of the arguments that were made up front. Please ensure that you remain respectable and you do not disturb the proceedings that is happening in the finals. For debaters, please ensure that you remain equitable in your speeches and ensure that you also offer POI utilizing the mics that is given in front of you. All right, the timer would be given from the committee on the right side. You can see the timer here. By the time you start speaking, we will automatically start the timer and it will take from your 720 minutes speech time. Without further ado, we welcome Prime Minister. Here.
I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, before jumping into my argument, let me characterize some of the actors. First, the interest of Indonesia government. Indonesian government interest is in societal welfare, which we want people recognize Indonesia more, which this gonna lead investor coming to us. Second, the expense of our other sports, meaning other sports beside football, such as badminton, basketball, and etc., will be put in less prioritized, which meaning we're not set aside them. We're just not putting them as our prioritized. And the most important things to take note here is prioritizing football is not only about giving our maximum to the football team only. but also when we support Indonesia to become the host for a very big tournament, for example, a World Cup. We can see the contextualization here. In status quo, our sports is developing and start being recognized by many people. And this also going to create a chance to investor and sponsor coming to us. And also this make Indonesia being recognized, which there is a urgency for us to prioritize football, since this is going to help fulfilling the interest of Indonesian government in societal welfare. Our mechanism is clear, where Indonesian government will allocate the budget, the biggest budget in sports for football rather than other sports, where our government will hire a very professional coach and even the best coach in this world to train Indonesia football team, for example. Why this have to be the priority of us? First, we can get the recognition from a lot of countries in this world, which is going to help investors come to us. And how this is going to happen? When Indonesia hosts a tournament, it makes it possible for all the football supporters from all the world to come to Indonesia. They're gonna see how beautiful Indonesia is, and there is a chance to them to invest here. And second, we will also get a profit. How? Again, the example is when we become the host of any tournament, we will get a profit from the tourists coming from tourism side. This is also very beneficial, where they not only gonna watch the football tournament, but also visit our tourism spot, trying our food, etc., etc. This is very beneficial for us, hence this is also profitable. Number three, when we prioritize the football team, which we know Indonesia football team is already so good, we invest on them. When they win a tournament, this is also going to bring Indonesia to be more well known, and it is multiplied by the team of the member. And at the end, judges, I gave you a very exclusive argument, not only beneficial yet practical and also broad impact. I told you how this proposal gonna bring a lot of benefit that CG cannot extend. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that speech. Friendly reminder that POI is highly encouraged. We welcome Leader of Opposition. Here.
Test. All right. Judges, firstly, I'd like to show you how the opening opposition would not want the development of soccer to be at the expense of other sports. This is our main point. We do not believe that what the OG has said is actually beneficial, and it is actually harmful towards Indonesia as the government. So let's first understand what kind of things will become harmful from their proposition. Firstly, there will be the death of minor and culturally integral sports towards Indonesia's culture and identity. We can see this when, let's say, we develop soccer to its full extent, and then it becomes the culturally acceptable, the most culturally appreciated sports behind Indonesian culture. It will kill all the other minor sports, because kids don't want to play any other sports other than soccer, because soccer is the cool thing right now. It's the trend. It's the main thing everyone wants to see. And thus, all the other sports, all the other culturally irrelevant sports, which are local and less global than it is than soccer, is going to suffer because of this. So even, let's see the case in point, which is for example, Pacu Jalur. Maybe most of you have seen it through TikTok, YouTube, Shorts, and so on and so forth. That sport is very integral towards Indonesian culture, and it has shown to be able to put Indonesia in a global spotlight when the government actually supports that kind of culture, that kind of sport, traditional culture, traditional sport that Pacu Jalur has been able to show. It also makes Indonesia famous globally in the digital town of netizens, through making it become a tourist destination. People want to see what kind of sport are also existing in Indonesia other than just Pacu Jalur. But of course, Pacu Jalur will become the main entryway. So this is why we want to also embrace all the other sports that exist. We don't want to develop soccer at the expense of other sports. We actually want to develop soccer also, because there are benefits that we agree with, but if it's at the expense of other sports, we cannot agree with this. So our counter policy is that we can focus on the best athletes within sports and give them funding, for example, through sponsorships, which also already exist, which is able to help invest more into the soccer as a sport without actually being at the detriment of other traditional sports. So this funding would be used for coaches, paid trips, dedicated fields for them to train their soccer. But we also want to show that there is a very important point here, is that we also need to focus on one team, or at least one of the best teams, to be able to push them into the international spotlight. Because why is that? If we allow the development of soccer as a very big field, like the whole field itself, there will be multiple teams that pop up. And we understand, as Indonesian society, we value soccer a lot. We have a lot of pride entanglement with the teams that we support. People go to extra lengths to watch their favorite teams offside, onside, and support them so much that we create riots within each other's fan base, as can be seen in the recent case of Kanjuruhan. There's a lot of people who died there. Tragic death, which could have been properly mitigated if we didn't have so much emphasis on one sport. There's so much pride entanglement within this sport itself, which then creates a very big issue. It doesn't just create diversity, it creates diversion instead. So what we want to propose here is the point of diversity also. Let's understand that what the government side of the bench is trying to propose here is alienating a lot of people from one another also. So when we also understand not everyone likes soccer. I myself, for example, prefer taekwondo. I don't really like watching soccer. So whenever my friends all talk about soccer, I feel alienated. What am I supposed to talk with them? I have nothing in common with them. There's nothing we can talk about. And that makes me feel not as appreciated in the social sphere. So when soccer becomes the mainstream, it ruins any other sources of social connection for people. Now, what is the benefit from our point of our proposition then? There won't be as much benefit from the SQ that the government is trying to propose here, because also there will be the benefits, like for example, economical benefits from developing soccer to its full extent is also not that much compared to if we already develop sports which are already able to reach the international level, for example, like badminton, or maybe other sports which also exist, which rarely get the spotlight from Indonesian people because it's not as well helped out, not well funded by the government. It's not as well put a lot of spotlight on from the media as well, for example. So, but there will be more benefit for our country if we diversify where we put the kind of focus of development and funding to other sports. Yes, POI?
Funding from government is limited.
That is why we want sponsorships, which already exist. We want sponsorships to help fund the development of other sports as well, and not at the detriment of others, which they also realize will be the case because they don't think that there are other ways the government can get more money, but that's not the case. We can get it through sponsorships and whatnot, and deals and whatnot, which is a lot more beneficial for Indonesia government. Cultural diversity also strengthens when we are able to put a lot of more focus on other sports that are very much locally grown, and those are also culturally integral to our identity. We need to also understand that local sports create the kind of, they are created out of Indonesia. It is very much local. It's different than soccer, which is actually something that's based in Western culture. It's born out of the Western media, and it's brought over to us through colonization, and thus a lot of people in Indonesia actually know soccer from there. Not actually, it's like something that's necessarily integral towards Indonesia's culture and identity. I think that concludes our proposition. Proud to be opening opposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that speech. To close the case from opening government, we welcome DPM. Here.
Focusing on football, which is an already culturally famous and an already proliferated sport, will be a prerequisite for us to accumulate profit to achieve what the opposition wants. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will start by rebuting sponsors. We see within the shirts of those clubs, or for example, within the arena that they use for those football competition itself. Now, second of all, by the economy of branding Indonesia as a football country, hence increasing our likelihood to be the home of many competitions and many sports of football within the future. For example, we can see this from Brazil. By focusing its resources in football, it successfully gained a huge capital from tourism through hosting football matches and a huge culture of football athletes itself. Now, I will continue with some of the arguments that will bring forth within the OGs. That first of all, this context and characterization makes it important for the Indonesian government to prioritize football itself. Now, this is because of the context that has been previously given, which is how popular the sport itself within Indonesia and within the international market. On the other hand, the opposition may argue that Indonesia have other sports that they can focus in. For example, badminton, which is an already quite of a popular and quite of a successful sport itself within Indonesia and within Indonesia. Now, we argue that this is comparatively different from football, which give off a different principal privilege, which is the reason that football comes with the forms of teams rather than individuals. Hence, the profits are multiplied in each brand deals these individuals receive, which results in two results. First of all, the increase of branding for the Indonesian name itself, and now second of all, the cycle of profits for Indonesia. We say this is possible because the huge size of the football team and market size creates a great model for these national brands to capitalize on those football teams, to promote their own brands rather than just individuals within competitions, to which, for example, badminton still have less of a size of market and boast less size of individuals for them to promote. For example, in football, you have a lot of individuals, and each individuals can promote their own diverging brands, which then introduce more market rather than just badminton, for example, that only owns, for example, 2 individuals. Now, hence, this is the reasoning why it stands clear that football gives its own comparative advantage that cannot be achieved with other sports in Indonesia because of this factual size benefit itself. So now, is there any POIs? Yes, please, the closing.
So, I think you say that football is sustained so that they get more exposure of it. How will you ensure that other type of sport will still sustain when they has less exposure and minimum funding?
Okay, because the thing is, the prerequisite for you to even sustain those sports is by achieving the successes of football itself. Because football is an already highly marketed sport itself, it will ensure that the prerequisite for you to succeeding other sports is ensured because profits will come more and people will popularize those sports because they see football in the first place. So now let us continue by a couple of things. By the second reasoning is that the football team itself within Indonesia is already growing very comprehensively within the status quo. And now we see this through, first, the increase of the naturalization of athletes that brings foreign experiences to the national teams. And now second of all is that the increase of Indonesia's position in the international stages itself. For example, by how closer we are to achieving and entering FIFA itself. As such, the status quo marked by first the development of the football team itself, and second of all, the already existing culture of sport within football, both in Indonesia and internationally, shows a comparative advantage that we cannot achieve with other sports, and we can achieve it as a prerequisite for whatever the opposition wants. Proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. To close the opening half, we welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Test. I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Sports can be polarizing, but it is a device where people, the citizens of a nation, can pour their pride, aspirations, and hope for their country. Football is one of the most recognizable, popular, but it is also one of the most polarizing sports that exists. However, we as the opposition bench believe that football should not be the monolith to represent Indonesia's identity accurately in the global stage, especially not at the expense of other sports. Judges, I would like to remind that the motion itself states that the government's house will do this at the expense of other sports, meaning that other sports will receive less prioritization and possibly head towards the direction of extinction for the smaller, less recognizable, traditional cultural sports that are more meaningful to our history as Indonesia, a nation with rich cultural background that transcends, that has hundreds and hundreds of different minorities within the country itself that makes us one nation. First, let me engage with the opening government's definitions and arguments. The opening government states that the Indonesian government's interest is to achieve societal welfare as well as to earn profit, especially then to eventually have the dream to become the host of the World Cup. However, let me show you why this dream and earning profit is actually a little bit contradictory. As seen in another example, another very prolific world team-based sport that is very, very popular and also costs a lot of money, F1. For example, in Malaysia, F1, Malaysia actually hosted F1 once or a few times within the past decade in Sepang. They have a track there. However, that hosting itself cost Malaysia a lot of money to the point where they could not continue to host F1 track anymore. And so, to be able to become the host of a world-level sports, it is required for Indonesia to have a lot of capital in of itself. And this capital, if the government wishes to earn that capital through this developing of Indonesia's football scene, which then they wish to do that, and then they wish to create the possibility of hosting the World Cup, no thank you, then that seems to be a very, very hard thing to achieve, because then they would be pouring this to the development of the football itself. Then where are they going to receive the funding to host the World Cup if, let's say, that their operations do not essentially make it towards the World League? We know that Indonesia is not known in the world stage for its football scene, even though football itself is a very, very popular sport. And in fact, as mentioned by my previous speaker, right now, Indonesia is more well known for its traditional sport in the world in the online world, such as pacu jalur. So why does the government not wish to instead pour more efforts into promoting this, which again will promote the idea of tourists arriving to the country and even pushing that traditional sports that we have back into the global stage. And we also see that they mentioned that football is self-sustaining and that it is already a popular sport. What about other sports such as badminton, as mentioned by my previous speaker, that has already reached the world stage? Are they also not self-sustaining? So then why are they getting sidelined? Why are these world-class athletes potentially getting sidelined to propose the further development of football? Is it only because that football is more popular to the masses, even though we could potentially be allocating those funds to perhaps promoting these world-class athletes even further to the mass instead of potentially pushing them to the side and reducing the chances of Indonesia to be known globally within other categories as well, other than football, which we currently are not that well known for anyway. But for badminton, there are names of athletes that have made it among international athletes too. And my opening government has actually mentioned that there is a harm in potentially developing football further because football is a very polarizing sport. How exactly will the government prevent the harm that may crop up from radicalized fanatics of football itself when football becomes even bigger of a sport? As mentioned by my previous speaker, we had a recent tragedy involving football as a sport because our country is very divided on which team to support. Let's say that the government wishes to bring Indonesia up to the global stage. Then they need to promote one main team within this country to become the representative of Indonesia. So how exactly are they going to be able to prevent that initial riot, the initial violence that may pop up because their team did not make it to become the representative team of our country within that global stage itself, if that does happen? And that is very likely to happen because right now, locally, that has already been happening. And so our counter policy about sponsorships actually happen in our side of the house. It is not exclusive to their side of the house because sponsorships does not require other companies from abroad. It actually can involve companies locally itself. So we do not need to, the country itself can actually work with local big companies. We have many, many big, lucrative, multi-million companies locally to sort of fill the deficit of funds that the government do not need to take funds that were allocated originally for other sports and allocate it to football instead, which then again put these other sports as a sideline. And therefore, we believe that the opposition has mitigated the harms caused by or proposed by the government. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. To open the closing half, we welcome Member of Government. Here.
Am I audible? Is this great?
That's clear.
Okay, wait, sorry. Okay, amazing. Okay. What's missing from opening trade off is that they're only talking about why footballs generally is bad, for example, or football is generally good. But they don't really necessarily opt into the reason why Indonesians exactly need to do it right now. I'll explain later in my contributions. But before that, a few responses towards opposition's bench. I think there's a lot that they bring in this table. They talk about how, other sports probably will be oppressed. I don't think this is true. It's just a matter of prioritizations. We're not going to, entirely neglecting them because this only means that you will be less prioritized. Means that we will prioritize, football team until when the sports economic systems are actually better. Then we can actually focus into other sport, for example. This is a lot more greater under all side. But secondly, they also talk about, I think the opposition, the LO talk about how the idea you should focus on those who are probably are already talented. Their responses, your side will probably cause the, hinderment of, finding real gems. Why? Because if this was the logic, I think government will not have the incentive to actually wider the scholarship, for example. They will only go for those elitist places, for example, who already have trained people because these are the fastest to do that, right? Because we only goes to those who are talented, for example. But secondly, I think funding are limited. As much as they want to focus on every sport, we simply can't. Heavy overlights on sport also mean that you will taken from other industry in Indonesia, for example, like healthcare or education. And this is also what OGs are missing in their case, hence why we probably will win this debate, right? But thirdly, they talk about how, I think the biggest contributions is also about how sponsorship exists, therefore we should only opt into that. Two responses. One, in all sides, generally sponsorship will not be gone. But second, sponsorship is generally bad because they are private institutions. They are more likely to create contract. They're much more, benefiting for them. Hence why you look at a lot of talents, for examples, are actually, used by this sponsorship, for example. Therefore, I think it's better for government to opt into these people so that they will create better, system for the agency of the athletes itself. But now let's come into my contributions, right? Later. On models, I think how prioritizations come from government look like. This won't be like, happens entirely like all the time. I think this is only happens like currently in a short time, for example, until finally like the sports systems are actually sports system economics are actually getting better. But yeah, models. A, we think this look like allocating funding to search for capable or high quality coach, but not only that. B, this is also mean government will actively search for new and developing new talents in underdeveloping area, for examples. This is mean there will be more scholarship that opt in for those talents for football, for example. And I think this is really, really important because I think there is a gazillion child who had the capacity but had no sponsor, for example, because they live in rural area. For those sponsorship, it's hard for them to actually opt in. But for governments, I think this is a lot more easier, right? In principle, I think it's only moral when governments ought to help or enhance these people's need or this youngster. This is also great because this child will probably have the best partner or sponsorships. Why? Because I think government only demand for achievement, for example, knowing you like football, this is probably are aligned to your interest. So this will not be like a bigger problem. But private sponsorship is simply bad under two reasons. One, they create dependency and have no bargaining power. Why? Because I think the fact that they are privates, they can do whatever they want, for example, right? In CG, government won't do this. Why? Because they probably are watched by people, so contract won't be as harming as how OOKs will be. But two, there will be hard bureaucracy that coming from private sponsorship, for example. Since they were private and independent, check and balance is harder, because they have like right to keep secret, for example. To gain money for your improvement is also harder, because I think fans or people in general can push them to them for to ask for the athlete to get treated better, for example. But if government, they will be able to do so. But see, this is also mean we will creating better facilities. This is also great, like Stadion Haji Murtala, for example. This is great because the stadiums enable other people to enjoy the facilities and not only people who are athletes, for example. But not only that, this is also create like small business and etc. Right? But how does at the expense of other sport look like? I think this is simple. This probably look like government will allocate funding. They have little to no inter-sport segmentations. Those who has been re-evaluated but have no people that actually want to opt in, for example. So we will not just directly, like OG say that, badminton and etc. But more of like those sports segmentation that probably are not really in, spotlight, for instance. But contribution, we think this is the time and the momentum to do so. Why? Because to begin with, I think football is not only a basic sport, but it's the identity for us as Indonesians, where the winning of Garuda team bring everyone, poor, rich, Nusantara, Javanese, Achinese in general, to united. By the fact this is probably everybody interested to see Indonesians to win, government need to push their focus on this. This is why I think personally this is fine. But again, what are the status quo exactly right now? I think recently Indonesia team showed that there is an achievement proceeding to certain qualifications, for example, in which I think didn't happen like a couple years ago. That's why right now is the momentum, or else you will lose it and probably will lose all of those talents, for examples, right? But why that this is beneficial? I think three flips. One, through the fact that this is also means you gain public or society trust. This will also align with government's interest. But before that, yeah, sure.
Sponsorships are the crux of sports, especially in big ones. How are you going to pay for the athletes if there are no sponsorships? Thank you.
I didn't say we will generally reject the idea of sponsorship. When we say that government will put more effort to actually opt in into the athlete, therefore there will be two check and balances that happens in status quo. But yeah, continuing on the benefits, right? I think you put spotlight on segmentations that are much more possible profiting the country. But why through football and why right now? I think OG missing the case that status quo right now, Indonesia's economic is unstable. They cannot opt into just everything. Even if they do, let's say, let's be charitable on opposition's bench, right? I think this is also mean you probably will take from health or educations. This is terrible, simply because even if every sport might be catered, like opposition bench badly want to, you will cost education's funding. You will cost the access for the for the educations itself. You can't really focus on other sport when exactly the economic of itself is not great. Therefore, I think it is better for you to actually opt in into what is probably are able to creating better economic system for the sport. But secondly, I think this is also mean you are probably open more chances for underprivileged people to opt in into sports, because this is also mean that the openment and the wider, the bigger chances for people in underprivileged to be up in and be given like scholarship. Therefore, proud to be CG.
Thank you for that speech. We welcome member of opposition. You're here.
Starting in 3, 2, and 1. There's a little boy in Jakarta having interest in sports and activities that require strength, analysis, and also strategy. His dream is to become a pencaksilat athlete in the first place. But the exposure that he got when he developed and he got oftenly is more on football. Growing up, he isn't pursuing his dream to be a pencaksilat athlete, but he became a football player instead because he thinks that it's more accessible and his popularities will bigger in that side. Therefore, we are very proud to oppose this. Before moving on, I think our stance here as the opposition is clear that first, we don't want to prioritize in specific sport, and here is football as the government of Indonesia, because we believe that brings more harm than good to the people of Indonesia, moreover the government of Indonesia. And also the second, we wanted to pursue that all the categories of sport should have same equal portion of attentions, and it can be in the terms of fundings, news and publications, quarantines, and also sports academies. Before moving on, I think I need to recharacterize first what is already like in the opening benches. The first thing about the sport is the field that needs an engagement so that it can continue and sustainable in the future and being good enough so that the country getting the interest, right? So it is not an instant thing that we can just give the small or the little funding or the little exposure for them in order to them to continue to operate. So therefore, when prioritization happen in their side of the house, I think the engagement is more likely to be happen on the football, right? So that the another types of sport is getting less or even little engagement. I think the other type of sport will decline, moreover, not only in an instant way, moreover in the next decade, for example, and it is really harming the people or even the government. So, the second thing is the interest of the peoples in this motion. The first is the interest of the government, right? So the government in this term of sport, they need the exposure and also pride in the eyes of the world, right? Because, for example, European country known by basket, for example, so that the government of Indonesia has an interest here in order for this government or government of Indonesia to get the fame of the countries in the name of the world, for example. When we prioritize football here, the creativity will just likely to know in the terms of football only. So therefore, second thing is this sport opens a big way for creativity for the people of Indonesia. For example, if we prioritize football, the creativity will just likely to know there because they are more likely to get exposure in news, for example. For example, there are so many channels of Indonesia, so that because this prioritization happen, this channel of Indonesia would more likely to give the news about the football. Therefore, the people of Indonesia would really less likely to know about other sport that is happening in Indonesia, other sport that is good for the people of Indonesia. So therefore, the creativity will just happen in our side of the house. Even if the government benches, they wanted to say that, oh yeah, we didn't leave another field of sport, but with this prioritization happen, and what we know in the status quo that sport already have a massive and also a big attention of people of Indonesia. I think this will really decline another types of sport. Therefore, it brings more harm for the people of Indonesia and also the government of Indonesia. And the second. So there are two things here. The first, for example, like the athlete of swimming. The athlete of swimming, because of Indonesia, because they feel they get the less exposure or minimal funding because they compare with the football player, for example, they will likely to find what? They will likely to find fame and support, right? Because they didn't get this enough support for the government of Indonesia. This athlete would likely to shift to another countries. For example, he go to Singapore because Singapore has more exposure on swimming athlete. Therefore, this has happened when this type of sport is less appreciated in Indonesia. Therefore, the athletes will feel less appreciated in its own country. The second thing, the society of the country will see the government as a bias toward one sport. Imagine that the people having more interest, having many interests. For example, in pencak silat, in badminton, in basket, but because they get less exposure, they will feel what? They will feel that they don't trust the government, or they even like, oh, the government is not giving us space for us to build our creativity more because they prioritize more on football. Therefore, they will not appreciate the government of Indonesia. I think the trust will only happen in our side of the house, while every single sport in Indonesia is appreciated in the same portion. So, how it will be happening in our side of the house? The first, there will be the same funding on sport in every categories. The government will put interest in the equal portions. So, the first thing is there will be the sport academies for the athlete, for example, football, tennis, and basket. Before moving on, POI.
Well, we're talking about the interest of the government, not the interest of small communities itself. I feel in this case, we can do utilitarianism where we profit the majority of the small communities.
Alright, before answering, I will continue first. So this government will make this academy for all of us sport that every single people of Indonesia has the accessibility on that. And the second, Indonesia will actively send this athlete of sport to maintain the fame and also interest, and therefore the government of Indonesia also can get the interest. But the development here also happening. Also this bring the name of Indonesia to extend and also to sustain. I know that Oji wanted to say that this prioritization or interest give better in the football. So they say that the character of Indonesia, I think for that to be happen, they want to attract they want to be a host, for example, for football competition. I think if that happen, even if they still want the interest of government because they attract investor, but at what cost they will do this? The first thing first, that character of Indonesia is stadion is still less, or until what extent this prioritization will be happen. Or even if they wanted to be the host of football competition, for example, but because Indonesia government also having the less capability, until what extent they want to prioritize this? Until what extent they want to take the fund for other type of competition in order for them to be the host of this football competition? So I think second thing is attracting investor can still happen in both sides of the house. Why? Because in our side of the house, when we already built many types of sport, I think the investor can still come because the investor not only exclusive in the football terms. Really, really proud to be the closing opposition.
Thank you for that speech. To close the government half of the debate, we welcome Government Whip. Here.
Am I audible? I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. When you're grown up in your own hometown, I think you are exposed by this kind of sport that actually football, and I think this kind of justifications would likely to be our winning point. Why at the end, in principally, we all right to actually govern Indonesia's government to spend or to prioritize more on the development of the football, and I will explain more later. But before that, let me engage to what actually opposition's band talks about. First, about the opening opposition's point, they believe that when we prioritize, it will kill the interest or will kill other sport or declining other sport. Two responses. A, no, you are wrong. Because when we are prioritizing, it doesn't mean that vanish or it doesn't mean that erase those kind of funding towards this kind of small or this kind of other sports that actually we are deprioritized, for example. Simply because of in the principally and practically it will be all right. When we're talking about principally, I think this football or soccer already exists for Indonesia for a centuries, for example, and well known. Even in this momentum, we have such an international attention. That's why we, as the Indonesian government, in this moment, want to develop or want to actually prioritize. And then after that, our mechanism is we're just prioritizing it such for 3 until 5 years, for example. We're not prioritizing these sports or this kind of football until next centuries, for example. And I think this kind of small or other sport would likely to be vanished simply because first they have their own community. Swimming have their own swimming community, for example. When we're talking about pencaksilat, it's actually a lot of time ago. So I think the community for 3 years more will still exist and will still actually giving this prolong for this kind of sport. I think even if you're right, this traditional sport from the beginning actually have their own interest, has their own segmented people, for example. That's why I think when we're just prioritizing this for a short terms or short time, I don't think that these kind of people that actually pursuing these traditionals would likely to be gone, would likely to be vanished for to begin with. Yes, PI.
Small traditional sports are already sidelined and receive less funding. If they are less prioritized within 3 to 5 years, the risk of extinction is very, very high. Thank you.
I think to begin with, Indonesia's government are not giving a same or equal fund towards every sport. I think this kind of traditional sports actually not giving not a lot of support from the government, but the existence of them in this kind of era means that their community already strong enough. They have those own support. They have their own sponsors, and that's why they still exist in this world, even that Indonesia's government not spending a lot to them. And in the closing oppositions, they believing that when we're giving this deprioritizing other sport, it will less appreciated towards the athlete and etc. I think it will then likely to be happen simply because the appreciation still come from your family, for example, still come from your community, still come from your own hometown, for example. And other that, I think this kind of communities to access to begin with and engage to the metrics of weighing. I think why then our mechanizations will be the one that actually winning in this debate, and why it will be likely to giving a beneficial or even significantly beneficial economics towards the Indonesian government, and at the end it would lead to Indonesians welfare society at the end of the day. But I think we brought OG first in this debate. I think OG trying to say that when we are prioritizing this kind of sports, it's likely to be hosting football, blah blah blah, and etc. I think this are the manifestations in the long terms, and I think they're not giving us the mechanizations. How then they want to actually prioritize this kind of development? But in CG, we're actually trying to giving you this kind of supporting in the infrastructure, for example, giving accessible football, for example. When we are supporting infrastructure, for example, making other stadium that actually will being used for a second tier of football player or club at the end when they're making such a tournament. I think this would likely to impacting towards the economic. For example, when we are make such a tournament in local terms, they will impact towards the society. For example, the society that actually in the area of this kind of place that actually made to tournament will get likely the economic terms. For example, they can selling food, for example, to these kind of athletes, to this kind of interest by the society that comes to this place. And then second, maybe the accommodations in that place will be increasing simply because there will be such a fans that actually comes to this place to actually supporting their own club or their own interest. But internationally, I think it will be really good simply because first, when we are talking about football, it already the momentum to us as Indonesia's government to actually increasing this kind of priorities. Why? I think Indonesia, like in the last years, we get a lot of attention for the internationally, but before that, POI?
How you ensure that when you just prioritize this for 3 till 5 years, that other type of support still get their engagement and supporters that is not declining?
Okay, for example, we take badminton. Badminton already exists in Indonesia for centuries, and they already have a support. They already have a financial support from the other stakeholders. But why then government are justified to actually promote or prioritize this kind of football? Simply because football are the main interest of our Indonesians and our culture, for example. And I think this leads towards something that actually being significantly beneficial. Why? When we're talking about internationally, when for example next year there will be like a World Cup, when we are Indonesians, when Indonesia's government actually prioritize this kind of sport, and then they search for another talent, for example, they're actually very talented that can represent Indonesians, and then by the time they will gain an interest. For example, when Indonesia's actually winning the World Cup, they will like a lot of interest that actually comes to us, like the tourism maybe will be lead, like OG said, and then other things that actually the exposures to lead to the international relations and comes towards the cooperations between Indonesia and other countries. For example, these kind of manifestations that would likely to be happen when we actually giving the prioritizations towards this kind of sports or this kind of football sports from the very beginning. And I think the entire case of the oppositions by extinctions of the other sports will then likely be happen simply because community and support and other financial support will exist, and proud to be CG and finalists.
Thank you for that speech. To close the entire Novice Finals debate, we welcome Opposition Whip. Here.
Okay. All right, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, and also honorable panels, I'm speaking here as the government of Indonesia, the country that is known for its majestic island of Bali, the uniqueness signature of batik, and the infamous impression of how friendly our people are. We do believe that there are many qualities of Indonesia to keep relevant in the world, and one of which is our football team. But before I jump into my responses and also my engagement, I have one question for all the people in this room, is that how many of you knows Indonesia football team or Indonesia football players rather than other sports of Indonesia? I can guarantee to you panels, and I can guarantee to you, ladies and gentlemen, that there are many of you knows football team, Indonesia football team, Indonesia football players rather than rather than other sports in Indonesia. Meaning what? Meaning the existence of football team in Indonesia is already relevant enough. They are already popular enough for them, which government team already acknowledged that they have so many sponsors for them. So if government thinks that, with this mechanization, they are only lessening the priority to any other aspect, as if Indonesia football, bigger popularity in Indonesia, doesn't prove how little priority given to other sports in Indonesia. And why? And with that popularity already rising in Indonesia football team, meaning that they have already enough incentive for them to collaborate to like hiring coach. If government thinks that they want to hire a professional coach to the World Cup, they are already being incentivized enough from the government to actually hire a very good coach to the World Cup. And second of all, they say that with this more incentive from the government, they can go to rural area for them to preserve or like for them to preserve the football players from rural area. But panels, they fail to acknowledge what are the sports existing in rural area, which my speaker already stated to you that there are traditional sports that exist more in like the rural area. Like what? Like for example, pencak silat that my first speaker has already stated to you. So panels, when OG comes with this motion, that by supporting this motion, it will also encourage Indonesia football to like the World Cup, for example, or like be more existing to like receive sponsor as if in the status quo Indonesia football team already thriving as it is. They already have so many sponsors compared to other sports. So why not then with even the salary of their football players already big enough, and also with this sponsor, why can't they collaborate instead to hire a coach for them to go to the World Cup, or for them to like preserve these people from the rural area? So that's why we think that we do not need to prioritize Indonesia football in the expense of other sports. And also panels, notice that OO doesn't also recognize the reason that hinders the citizens to recognize traditional sports, and this is our contribution to you. It is the exclusive sports, which I'm going to extend later in my argument. So here's our contribution, and why do we think rejecting this motion is better than otherwise? With our contribution panels, we can acknowledge much more the larger scale of like sports in Indonesia later on compared to OO. But why then panels? This is urgent, right panel? Why must we so determined to protect other sports, and why do we think that football team in Indonesia is already thriving as it is, and they do not have any more incentive from the government? Ladies and gentlemen, the question that I gave to you in the beginning, like how many of you actually know football team in Indonesia or football players in Indonesia compared to other sports in Indonesia? Meaning what? Meaning that the existence of Indonesia football team is already thriving as it is, with its old fans of leather, with its old fan of Timnas, Persija, Persib, rather than other sports, right? Then why panels must we fund them more in expense of other sports? Government also comes with statement arises that this expense will accommodate Indonesia football team to World Cup for them to hire coaches so that they can be much more powerful to the World Cup. But panels, here's my response. Here are some players that engage with their statement. First layer is that Indonesia football, again, they are already popular enough to get funding from like the sponsor or like for their salary as a whole, so they can collaborate to like hire a better coach for them to go to the World Cup. And second of all, again with that sponsor, they can actually accumulate have an accumulation of those sponsors to actually uplift their existence later. And also, second of all, football players are always updated, right, panels? Meaning what? Meaning if they want to, meaning what? Meaning that, again, they will start from zero, for example. So if with this motion arises, meaning that government needs to like fund them from the zero, and it will always go to the zero until they are receiving to the World Cup. Then what is us as government concerned to like other sports in Indonesia? Yes?
But the priority of the Indonesian government itself is social contract of social welfare, which needs wealth. How do you assure in your side, your own sport can accumulate the same amount of wealth as we have proven does with football? Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to answer that later in my statement. But I'm going to continue with my statement. Now, knowing the funding of football team as a team of Indonesia and individual player already a lot is the reason why we are so adamant to preserve this other sport. Indonesia football team is already existing from like the old team, like government tries to POI me. So meaning their popularity will still be maintainable. So they don't need more funding from the government. Now I'm coming with my mechanization. My mechanization is that we are going to preserve exclusive sport and also have traditional sports be more accessible. First is tennis. Tennis is a sport that is globally competitive competitive, and but it is exclusive from Indonesia because it is very expensive. Therefore, we are going to provide them an academy to actually play tennis and to actually compete in them, and therefore it will be leveraging the existence of other sports in Indonesia. Second of all, we are going to fund the traditional sports coming from the rural area so that it can uplift Indonesia diversity of like the culture. And my first speaker, and also government fails to come up with the likelihood what happens when football team Indonesia for the popularity as it is will like failing the other sports, because then people only want to be football player, and it decreases the exclusivity of other sports. So that's why they do not need more funding as it is. So that's why we are very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you for that speech, and thank you for a wonderful, wonderful debate. Give yourselves a round of applause for completing NUDC Novice Finals 2025. Okay, Judge will take some time to deliberate, and we will see you tonight in the awarding to know who will be the champion of Novice Finals. Thank you, everyone.